Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Benjamin. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And guess what? I'm going to talk about proximity, but I think you already knew that. And I chose the title, I don't know if you recognize it. It's actually the title of a song from the Streets of Fire movie from the 1984. Some of you are too young to know it, but maybe other people have heard about it. But I chose the title because I think it perfectly portrays the fact that the underlying title. So we have actually been undermining proximity with speed. So nowadays we can very fastly reach nowhere. A lot of places where there is no reason to go. Okay, and this is what I want to talk to you about today. There are three important things I wanted to explore. First, what is proximity, what it means. Second, how it's undermined by speed, and that's the key issue of this talk today. And lastly, why it's important that we are aware of it. Okay, so these are the three issues. And what can I say about proximity? It has been talked about a lot recently, but it's not a recent term. It has been along for a very long time. But it has got a lot of traction recently with other terms, such as the human scale city or the 15-minute city. There's even a whole financing pillar dedicated by one of the big European bodies like the DOT on it. So it's clearly a hype concept at the moment. But what does proximity mean? And to start simple, I started with an online dictionary. The Cambridge Dictionary, and it says it's a state of being near in space or in time. So this would mean that proximity is either that you're physically close or that you are temporarily close. I don't know if that's an English word. So if you're physically close, it's about distance, and the other one is about time, travel time. But that is intimately connected to speed. So we're coming slowly up to the meaning of this talk. And if we think of this slowly, these two dimensions of the definition of Cambridge for proximity are actually related to the means of another planning priority that a lot of you in this room are familiar about, because this conference is actually together with the Nectar Cluster 6 meeting. And this meeting talks about accessibility. And actually, accessibility, as we have known for several years, is an end that can be attained by two different means. On the one hand, proximity, and I've put it purposefully on the left, and on the other hand, mobility. So this was conceptualized like this by Jonathan Levine. So can you see the potential contradiction here? So you have proximity as physically close and temporally close, but then if we look at it from accessibility point of view, actually proximity is only the physically close part and not the temporally close part. So to try to clarify this a little bit, in a recent research that we have done together in CITTA and TUM, we have put forth the concept of proximity-centered accessibility, which brings the two previous ones together. And we have put it forth in opposition to the right side, which we called mobility-centered accessibility. So actually what this means is that proximity-centered accessibility is the one that you attain mainly from proximity, so from being close by to the activities that you need. And then you need little or no mobility at all to have accessibility. While the mobility-centered accessibility is one that is essentially attained by mobility. So proximity is not relevant. Normally things are far away, but you can still have high levels of accessibility if you can travel there fast. Okay? And this would be mobility-centered accessibility. So the issue is that when we look at this picture, we can understand the dual side of proximity, but, you can understand the dual side of accessibility, that on the one side you can get it from proximity, on the other side you can get it from mobility. But then it becomes harder to keep to the idea that proximity can be both closeness or temporal proximity. Okay? So fixating on the fact that it's actually about distance. And with this concept, I actually changed the distance to short distances and the time to short travel times, which actually means high travel speeds. Okay? So this is the opposition that I wanted to talk to you about. So now that we focused that proximity is about short distances, there's still a question how short these distances should be. And so in the same study I just referred before, we asked accessibility experts what they thought that proximity is. How far away could we go to still be close? And we concluded that actually all of them thought, the ones that we got on our survey, all of them thought that 1.6 kilometers is far enough for proximity. Okay? But actually, roughly 90% of them thought 1.2 kilometers more than enough. So it's really short distances. But then we thought, well, just asking researchers is not enough. So we decided to ask planning practitioners. And for this, we enlarged our consortium. We involved more than 30 researchers from 22 countries and managed to have the same survey sent out to the planning practitioners in those countries. And here you can see the results. And again, among planning practitioners, most of them think then 1.6 kilometers is far enough for proximity. You can now find some smaller percentages of people thinking about higher distances when they think about proximity. But it's, for instance, interesting to notice that in the 10 kilometers part of the responses, the majority of people that responded that actually don't come from land use or transport backgrounds. They come from other backgrounds, although they work in planning practice. So this makes us feel that we still need to look into another group, which is citizens. And Benjamin already referred this before. So this is the next step of the project. I have done results. I don't have results yet. We could have asked ChatGPT, but that would be cheating. But we'll have in the next session. But anyway, if we think on just professionals working in the area, I think it is fair to say that among these professionals, there seems to be an agreement that there is this kind of universal travel distance budget for something very specific that we call independent vehicle mobility. So mobility that we can perform without being dependent on any kind of vehicle or travel speed enhancements. Okay? So coming back to our previous concepts, it's okay that distance and speed are two sides of the same coin, and we understand that for accessibility. But it's also important to understand how these influence each other, and we shouldn't ignore this. And for this, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the negative feedback loop, which is a hypothesis that I put forth together with my colleague, Marcelo Altieri, in 2022. And it actually first starts by stating that these two types of accessibility directly influence each other. And more than this, the increase of mobility-centered accessibility that we have had during the last long decades have had a direct impact in reducing the proximity-centered accessibility that we have in our cities. And to explain this a little bit better, let me just show you in a couple of pictures what is happening. So the last decades, and I'm talking long decades, we have mainly focused on the your right side of the scheme. So in producing solutions which would increase our travel speed. So we have offered more highways, we have offered high-speed trains, and we even have offered cycling highways. And the idea is always the same. If we improve or we increase speed, we will reduce travel time. That was the original objective. Okay? And this might have happened if land use would have kept the same, which is one of the presuppositions behind this travel idea. But actually what happened on the other side was the opposite. The first reaction was urban dispersion. We heard a lot about that today already. So today, an unprecedented amount of people are able to choose to live in a location where there's actually nothing around. So no coffee, no bread, no milk, no schools, anything, because they can compensate the lack of proximity with highly efficient transport systems. And actually the opposite is happening with activities. So activities tend to concentrate when it's easy to move around. So if people have this ease to move around, instead of being close to people, you can close down all your branches and have just one shop. For instance, in a major shopping mall, which used to be huge in the 90s in the north of Europe, but let me tell you, in Portugal, they are still huge. And the southern part of the world still loves shopping malls. So it's not a hype that has gone away. Okay? But this has not happened just with shopping malls. It had happened, and with shops in general, it has happened with public activities as well. Schools, hospitals, courtyards, everything. They are closing down the smaller ones and opening bigger ones. Okay? And this is actually reducing our proximity. And the final reflect. And this is a reflect that happens in city centers, so in areas which traditionally are 50-minute city. You have high density, you have activities there, but activities start closing down because people living around them, if it's easy for them to travel, why should they choose the closest one? They have so many choices and it's easy to travel, they can go somewhere else. And although a lot of cities have overgone this problem, it's true that in the 90s, many cities, the city centers, faced this decline. Some have recovered, but many others are still there. Okay? So what is the end result of this? On the one side, proximity has lost its value for location, for people or for activities. You can compensate it with speed. And on the other side, we are dependent on speed right now. So what many of us call freedom, freedom of having a car, freedom of having speed, is our dependence. And we have to start recognizing that we are dependent on speed. So actually, we did not reduce travel time. We increased travel distances. And now, since we are implying the same recipe, we are going to increase speed again, with the hope that it will reduce our travel time. What do you think about that? But what is happening in practice with proximity? We are currently finishing a project for DUT, so it's led by Benjamin here at TUM, together with us at Porto and with Westminster, and we're looking at mapping 15-minute city practices. And in our research, we found close to 100 cities self-advertising themselves as 15-minute cities or implementing 15-minute city policies. Most of them are in Europe, but this is promising. So there's a lot of interest here. But when I show you the map of Europe, the size of the circle is proportional to the amount of policies that are being implemented. And if you have different colors, it means that there are a variety of different policies. So the reality is clearly not the same across the cities. You have very different levels of commitment, let it call us like that. Okay? So this brings me then to the risks and why it is important that we don't ignore the undermining effect of speed, because this might lead us to the loss of momentum we have right now and bring us in the innovation curve that Luca talked about earlier, bring us down in the innovation curve with this term. So coming back to these two terms, why is awareness important? We have to remember that actually most cities are still in the mobility-centered accessibility side. So this is the dominant regime. If we want to increase accessibility, we need better infrastructure. And that proximity is the emergent regime. Although we have a lot of, or a growing number of cities interested in proximity, most of the cities are still unaware that by increasing speed, they're actually reducing their proximity. So the measures that they implement, they are no measures on proximity. They are just feeding the dominant regime. On the other side, the cities that are interested, we have the good examples. These are the committed policies for proximity. And in some of them, if we think a little bit about it, it is related with speed. Some of them have explicitly implemented measures which reduce speed. They have taken out highways. They have put the limits on traffic speed inside the city centers. Other cities did not recognize that it has to do with speed, but they were very conscious about the lack of quality in the city, so they changed. They changed the urban realm and the way that the urban design of public spaces is done. And by doing that, they had to take out space from the car. Okay? And the end result of this is that you actually, by reducing travel speed, you tend to invert what happened, what I showed you earlier with activities. So if increasing speed makes activities concentrate, reducing speed should logically bring activities back. And again, come back in quality and quantity to the cities. Okay? It's not like 50 years ago people didn't have access to things, and now we have. Okay? But there is still a third group of cities, and these, I would say, are the cities that are interested in proximity but aren't aware that speed is bringing down their proximity. So they think or are under the illusion that you can have both. And in these kinds of cities, you would find what I call uncommitted proximity policies. You can find things like a cycling lane on the sidewalk, or taking up the minimum space on the side of the road, which does not inflict any problem on their mobility-centered accessibility regime. This is how far they want to go. And these policies will bring necessarily results which are undermining their priorities for proximity. So they will be disappointed with the results. So in the end, they will, again, feed the dominant regime and give right to the people who defend that it's mobility-centered accessibility that you need. Okay. So, but until now, I have been essentially talking about the central areas of the cities. But the biggest problems that we tried to ignore generally are the suburban areas. And this because the suburban areas are actually a result of mobility-centered accessibility policies on the one side, but they exist in the three types of cities that we have seen. And across all of them, the reasoning is very similar. Because if proximity is not a possibility there, then let's solve it by mobility-centered policies, which will actually continue increasing the size of the suburb and increasing the size of the problem you have to solve in the future. And this is the problem if you are not aware of the impact that speed has on the rest of the system. So to close this, just one point that is also very relevant to this. This is particularly important if you consider the housing crisis that is going on all over the world. Okay? Because in this situation where cities, all of these cities continue to invest in speed to solve accessibility in the suburbs will grow, they will have lower prices, and all the people will be shifted out, particularly inequalities will be increased because it's the lower income people who will be shifted out. So to finish, my last words, we may agree that proximity is key to social, environment, and economic reasons, but proximity is about closeness, not about reducing travel times, because this is keeping up to the dominant regime. And aims of reducing travel time threaten proximity, and it's important to be aware of that. Thank you very much for your attention.